All right. Great. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you all today. To introduce myself, my name is Charlie Ray. I am a physician and hospitalist at the San Francisco VA Medical Center. I also wear a clinician investigator hat and study the impacts and use of telemedicine and socially vulnerable veterans as well. So those are my official roles here at UCSF and the VA. But today I'm going to talk a little about something a little bit different, another sort of side project and a passion for me, and this is sort of the use of social media and academics. The title of my talk today is Citizenship in Social Media: How to be a Constructive Member of an Online Community. Now, my qualifications to give this talk are probably similar to everyone else's qualifications to potentially give this talk. I've used social media and been in the social media sphere for probably 5 to 7 years at this point in time. I started using social media pretty aggressively during a research fellowship I did several years ago, and I found it to be very beneficial in my career. And in that time, I think I've had enough experiences to give me the ability to at least talk about this subject as we sort of move forward. I also think that this talk is really apropos, given sort of the paradigm shift that's somewhat occurring right now on social media platforms. You will see that I will be referring to Twitter a lot in this discussion. That's the primary platform that I use, and I think most physicians use. But if you're well aware, there's very much a tectonic shift in Twitter right now, and where that's going to be and where people are going to potentially move to, or if they're going to stay at Twitter, I don't know. And I'm not going to be able to answer that at this point in time. But nonetheless, I think what's led to those shifts on Twitter in the past several years, and obviously in the past couple of months, have been because of a lack of citizenship in discussions on this platform. So that's a little bit roundabout the discussion I have for you today. And let's go ahead and forward. So, no financial conflicts of interest to disclose.
Excuse me, Dr. Ray. You're picking up a little bit. I'm not sure if this is true for everyone else, but your audio is going in and out, and your video as well.
Okay. Can you see that? Wonderful. So I'll go ahead and get started again here. Again, my name is Charlie Ray. I am a hospitalist at the San Francisco VA. The other clinical hat I wear is I'm a health services researcher at the San Francisco VA as well, and I study and explore the use of telehealth in the VA healthcare system. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about a different subject that is sort of near and dear to my heart, and a place that I've spent a good amount of time over the past 6 or 7 years, and that's talking about the use of social media in academics. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of citizenship in social media, how to be a constructive member of an online community. And I think this is a really interesting topic for a couple of reasons. One is, as many folks know who are sort of familiar with this social media milieu at this point in time, is there seems to be a paradigm shift in what's happening on social media. Twitter is undergoing a massive potential restructuring. This is where a lot of physicians spend a lot of their time. And so where that goes, I'm not 100% sure. But what is interesting, one of my observations, is that a lot of what's happening right now may be potentially due to people not, adhering to this idea of citizenship and whatnot in social media. So I think today's discussion will be interesting from that standpoint and that point of view as well. You'll also hear me talk mainly about Twitter, because this is where I think most physicians spend most of their time when on social media to sort of interact and whatnot. So let's dive in. Conflicts of interest. I have no financial conflicts to disclose at this point in time. I do wear a hat as the Deputy Digital Media Editor for the Journal of Hospital Medicine. It's where I spend a decent amount of time, where I sort of extrapolated a lot of these experiences and insights. And as you'll see, a lot of what I'm going to actually talk about today really is based on my experiences and represent my opinions and personal views. You'll see that I'm kind of dancing in a data-free zone and a little in a gray area, which are always fun, but nonetheless, a fair warning that these are my thoughts and opinions and whatnot. So I want to open up and talk about how this talk actually came about in the first place, because it was certainly a process for me, and that process I found to be enlightening and something that I learned from and hopefully want to share with others with that process, because I think it all sort of comes together nicely. So I received this email here. Dear Dr. Ray, the UCSF Office of Graduate Medical Education would like to invite you to speak on the topic of professionalism and social media. And I thought, that sounds cool. That's really interesting. I like social media, but I had some deeper questions in there, mainly around this idea of, okay, well, what do we mean by professionalism? Who's judging what professionalism means in this context? Who are the judges? What are the criteria, right? And so simply put, I was a little bit confused, but I said, all right, knowing my audience here, what is it that they're trying to get at with this question? And I thought that the implicit ask sat around this idea of, what can we teach our learners and ourselves about how to act on social media platforms? And felt like, okay, that sounds reasonable. Let's build off of that, Charlie. And so with that, I came up with with my roadmap for this discussion. And so I'm going to first delve into and try to deconstruct this idea around professionalism and talk about professionalism in social media and why that may not be the best term for getting at what we're trying to achieve here, which is teaching people how to act in this atmosphere. Of course, as you can probably tell by the title of my discussion, I'm going to talk about citizenship and why I think citizenship is actually a better, more apropos term. And then finally, how to be a productive citizen in social media will sort of round out our discussion for the day. So let's jump into the professionalism of this discussion a little bit. So first and foremost, what does professionalism mean? When I first started researching this talk, I found this definition. Professionalism is the competence or skill expected of a professional. So, the best non-answer answer you could probably find. But as I was starting to think about this a little bit more, it started to dawn on me a little bit that, professionalism is this idea that is inoculated into our minds and from day one of medical school and in residency. Dress professional, look professional, act professional. And no one ever really defines what professionalism really means, right? But we just expect everybody to know what it means. But when I ask people to sort of envision, what does a professional look like to you, especially a professional doctor? My guess is you might picture some of the people here in this photo. White, clean, pressed, white coat, tie, button-down shirt, neatly dressed, hair parted, no tattoos, no, earrings, no facial rings or anything like that. And you can start to see that perhaps the idea of professionalism or the visual that we oftentimes get with this idea, it might be a little bit dated. And as I started researching and looking into this, I found lots of articles and lots of ideas, very modern ideas around the idea that professionalism is potentially defined by white Western cultures. And what this is doing at this point in time is really leading to discriminations of minorities based on their ethnicity, sexuality, the way they dressed, and other cultural identifiers. And it really opened my eyes to this idea that the term professionalism is very likely this antiquated term that potentially carries racist baggage with it. Because what it's doing is expecting other individuals from other races and ethnicities and sexualities to conform to I think the ideals that we oftentimes have in our heads. And I will point out this article here by Surafel Sega, who's a hospitalist in New York City, has a really great article published in the Journal of Hospital Medicine a couple of months ago, talking about redefining professional attire. And he approaches this subject, again, from how we dress in the hospital and how that could have exclusionary aspects to it as well. And why does this definition, and how does this definition actually impact us? And what it does is it leads those individuals who don't necessarily fit into that norm that we have created over the years to leads to people to sort of code switch, which is, changing the way a person presents themselves to others so that they can gain acceptance, right? And that's compromise and whatnot, and not always a good thing to do. People spend time on monitoring, filtering, presenting artificial images of themselves just so that they can feel like they are part of a group or make others perceive that they are part of that group as well. So simply put, the use of the word professionalism can change the way we perceive others and the way we act towards others. So there are certainly some ramifications with using this term. Now, I like to pause here, and I oftentimes like to give academia or physicians a little bit of, benefit of the doubt. We're highly intelligent individuals. We've trained for decades on understanding nuances of clinical decision making, right? We understand the idea of biases and both conscious and unconscious biases. So this idea that, or at least I give hope to the idea that, maybe we can deal with it. Maybe we can look beyond the ideas of professionalism and correctly ascribe what we're thinking about when we talk about professionalism in a correct manner. But as you can probably hear by the satire in my voice, the answer to that is actually we don't do a very good job of this. So I'll point you in the direction of the med bikini controversy in 2019. So if you were on social media at that point in time, you were probably familiar with this controversy. This was an article published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery. There were seven authors total. One of whom was a female. The rest were all male. So a little red flag should potentially be going off in your mind. And what they did is they compiled a list of graduating vascular surgery trainees on a variety of social media platforms, and then adjudicated whether or not they were posting professional or unprofessional things on there. And what they found is about a quarter of all accounts had potentially unprofessional content, such as provocative posing in bikini and swimwear. So at this point, the siren should be going off because we have now already ostracized half, if not more, of our audience. And the backlash was swift and correct, in my opinion. So here are 3 tweets that I've outlined here in response to the publication of this manuscript. I'll walk through each one of these and what I liked about each one of them. The tweet here on the left by Dr. Rosnick points out that there are 2 obstetrician gynecologists in this photo. One of them is professional, the other one is just on the beach. Rather, one of them is dressing unprofessionally, and the other one is on the beach. And so you can start to see the hypocrisy a little bit there. The second tweet here points out that, as a female in medicine who loves to travel to tropical locations and dress accordingly, and then posting photos of their travels, apparently that's unprofessional as well. And I particularly like, Dr. Tucker's solidarity and support here with his not so subtle way of pointing out the hypocrisy of the med bikini controversy and the fact that if he were a female, he would be labeled unprofessional. But as a male, he's merely just, enjoying a day in the pool. And so the med bikini controversy was not just limited to the social media realm. Many large platforms picked it up: the New York Times, Forbes, and CNN. So this wasn't just a little ripple. This was indeed a pretty big disruption, and shows that, again, the misappropriation or the misuse of this term professionalism can have deleterious consequences. And when you ask the question of who else could be potentially harmed by this term, the answers are broad and many, right? Because if we extend this term of professionalism to other minority populations, we can start to see that this is how a white-centered term can be deleterious to those whose cultural identity doesn't necessarily fit into this terminology. And we can start to see how what we look like, how we identify, can impact how we may be perceived as being professional in our work. So that was my first, that's why I first entered into this topic, again, with that email talking about professionalism. And I said, well, if we don't want to propagate um, uh, the idea of professionalism in social media, what's another way we can think about? What are we trying to achieve, and what's a better definition? And I come back to citizenship. So I want to talk about why I think citizenship is a more important and a better term that we can use when we talk about how we interact on social media platforms. So simply put, I think citizenship is a better term than professionalism because citizenship is defined by who you are. It's defined more by who you are, or defined not by who you are, rather, than by what you're actually doing. And as I was sort of doing research on this topic again, there's plenty of topics talking about professionalism in if you go into PubMed or Google Scholar and whatnot. But when you look up citizenship, there isn't much actually there. And it got me thinking, like, where might I find some material around being a good citizen or a good digital citizen? Of course, I stumble onto Amazon. What do I find? I find dozens of books tailored towards our children, teaching them about how to be good citizens along the way. And I found that really interesting because I'm not 100% sure what that says, but I would venture to say that it says that A, this is a pretty easy topic and not too complex, and that B, adults seem to forget how to do this along the way, especially when it comes to navigating citizenship on social media platforms. So I thought that was interesting, that this isn't a complex topic, and that's why we probably just need more refreshers on it as we go along. So what is digital citizenship? Basically, it's quite simple: how we actually interact on the online environment. This is a definition that I sort of put together here in reading a little bit more. So a good digital citizen is someone who is mindful of their online interactions, someone who treats others with respect regardless of their background. I oftentimes feel that second part of that second clause is oftentimes forgotten, unfortunately. Someone who takes responsibility for their actions and words, someone who listens just as much as they speak. I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit further on, but this idea that oftentimes on social media, we are given a platform, we are given a megaphone. And just because you have that platform doesn't necessarily mean you have to be speaking and using that platform all the time. And I think a great way to do that is, how do we create a good digital citizen creates space for other people and their voices as well. They also constructively provide to a community, don't just take, right, but give. And someone who's reflective of their own biases, someone who acknowledges that we get things wrong, and that's perfectly fine, that's okay. But if we can reflect and learn on those things and do that openly, then I think those are qualities of a good digital citizen. But why is it so hard to be a good digital citizen? And I think this comes down to communication, right? Communication is hard. It's very difficult on online platforms. And we know this, and it exists for a variety of reasons, right? We have fewer receptors and signaling mechanisms than we do in real life. On Twitter, you only have 280 characters to convey, a really nuanced argument. And so we lack that ability to, add inflection in our voice, or to insert pauses in how we speak, or to raise eyebrows, or to touch someone, right? So we've lost those abilities to connect. Topics in social media are often categorized or binary. We do this a lot in life, and we do it a lot in medicine. We categorize a continuous world. And what that does is that creates silos, it creates camps, it creates, you're either with us or you're against us. It's black or it's white. And again, as physicians and educators, we know that the world doesn't exist on this type of binary scale. But again, hard to convey in the social media realm. And it also, virtual communication also blunts those socio-emotional tones that we use when we speak to one another. So communication is tough, right? So we've established that there are some certain characteristics of a good digital citizen. And we've established that communication can be difficult, right? So now let's dive into how we can potentially communicate and operate as a good citizen a little bit better. So let's jump into the third part of this discussion, and how to be a good digital citizen on social media. And I've broken this down into three parts: teaching and education, advocacy, and networking. And why these three parts is mainly because this is why people come to social media platforms, right? We come there to teach, we come there to learn, we come to advocate for things that we think are important, and we go there to network personally and professionally. So let's keep these three domains in mind to help us structure how to be a good digital citizen moving forward. So let's jump in. Digital citizenship when teaching. So I look at citizenship on social media just as I do in the clinical realm or in the clinical setting, right? And what we're often doing when we're in the clinical realm is we're role modeling, right? So we're taking what we do. We recognize when we're in the clinical realm, whether that be in the clinic or on the wards, that you have 4 or 5, 6 sets of eyes on you at all times. And you always have to be on. You always have to, be a good digital citizen, because you recognize that no matter what you do, someone's going to look at that and perceive it as being good or bad, and is going to learn from you, right? And that same idea applies when you're trying to think about being a good digital citizen in social media realms as well. So I think you have to role model being a good digital citizen when teaching in digital spheres. These are a few ways that I've come up with doing that. So give proper attributions to authors of a study. So if you have a learner or someone who is below you in that hierarchical chain in social media, and they publish a great paper, give them that shout out, right? Give them that proverbial pat on the back. We would do the same thing in the clinical scenario as well, right? And go for what I like to call the triple win. The triple win is the following, right? So the individual who published the study, they get a win because you're patting them on the back and you're saying, look at this great work that this individual is doing. The audience wins because the audience then gets to see, great work that may not have been amplified had you not, retweeted it or liked it or commented on it in some capacity. And then finally, you win because now you're seen as a strong advocate and an upstander and as a good digital citizen. So the triple win is great, and always keep that in mind when you're trying to support people in that digital sphere. Provide sources for your statements. We do this, and we expect the same thing when we are teaching on the wards, right? Well, we're going to titrate this patient's beta blocker up because we know that the studies show that at lower heart rates, they do X, Y, and Z better, right? Well, the same thing in social media. If you're going to make some evidence-based or factual-based statement, make sure you're providing your sources and providing your insights into that as well. And importantly, read and understand what you're posting, right? Posting something and not having read it can come back to bite you. And so be careful about that as well. The next thing I say is don't delete, discuss. So if you post something and you turn out to be wrong, just dead wrong in it, own it. Don't get rid of it. I've done this before. I've said things on social media, posted something, and I was flat out wrong. And I'll be honest, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I've got to delete this. I've got to take it off. I look like an idiot. But after a little bit of reflection and then talking with a lot of my peer mentors, like, no, I can learn from this and others can learn from this. So instead of taking it away, just as I would in the clinical environment, I owned that mistake. I said, I misspoke. That was incorrect. Thank you for pointing that out. Again, role modeling for others on how we react when we do something wrong. And finally, view your tweets from all angles, just as we would act in the clinical scenarios, keeping patients, providers, other colleagues in mind. Do the same thing when you're in social media. Don't tweet about the patient you saw 20 minutes ago. Don't tweet about the odd interaction you may have had with, the consulting service yesterday. What I like to do is say, no same day tweets. I never tweet. I never interact on the social environment about anything that had happened within that basically 1 or 2 weeks. I'll write something down and then 2 weeks later find it and then tweet it. And just so that there's more disassociation between that incident and when I'm potentially speaking about it in some capacity. So keep in mind your audience is broad and wide, and protect yourself by acknowledging that. So let's talk about citizenship when advocating. I will admit that when I first got onto social media, advocacy was not the primary reason for me to enter into this sphere. And I think that holds true for the vast majority of people. People don't say, I want to go on to social media just so I can advocate for all these things. Oftentimes, I think physicians are going there again to primarily learn, educate, teach, and network. But my opinions on this changed over time. And I'm going to talk to you and show you a little bit about how and why that actually occurred. So I'm going to share with you an article that basically changed the way I view advocacy on social media. And I'm going to do the classic faux pas. I'm going to read off the slide here, but I think that's important because I think this is a really important topic here. So the current generation of physicians is the most challenged by moral choices in perhaps a century. Those choices come in three tiers: personal, organizational, and societal. The work of a physician as healer cannot stop at the door of an office, the threshold of an operating room, or the front gate of a hospital. The rescue of a society and the restoration of a political ethos that remembers to heal have become the physician's job too. Professional silence in the face of social injustice is wrong. And while I wish I could write that well, this came from the great Don Berwick, who is president and CEO of the IHI. If you don't know who Don Berwick is, he's just a great thought leader in medicine over the past couple of years, if not decades at this point in time. And so when he wrote this in 2017, this really opened my eyes to the idea that, yeah, my job as a physician certainly is to care for sick patients, but I also think it probably extends beyond that as well. And so Don Berwick, this piece by Don Berwick, it gave me permission. It gave me permission to start advocating for things that I thought were interesting and things that I felt needed a voice behind as well. So let's talk about how you might go about doing that. So my mentors early on taught me about this idea. So, just as you write from where you stand, you can tweet from where you stand. And so behind this is this idea of leverage your experiences and your knowledge as a physician. Now, I tell my learners all the time, especially my young learners, who oftentimes feel that they don't have enough experience or insights into multiple aspects of being a physician to have an opinion per se. And I say that's incredibly wrong. Even an MS3 or an MS4 has insights into the medical experience in the world that the vast majority of the population of the world does not. And so take a step back and recognize the power and the experience that we have as physicians, and know that we can use those experiences to talk about people who need to be advocated for in some larger sense. So recognize that you do have something to say, and I think the world is listening in a larger sense. The second thing I say is tell your story. In medicine, we oftentimes trade in quantitative measures, right? What is the odds ratio of this? What is, the proportion of individuals who have that? What is the success rate of that intervention? But as we've seen over the past, 3 years, data doesn't oftentimes change people's minds. It's oftentimes stories, right? And so if you're trying to get a point across as an advocate, yeah, use the data, but augment it with the story as well. And my guess is that most people are going to be hooked not by an odds ratio, but by your story per se. And finally, make space for others. One of the things that I've realized over the years being on social media is I have a proverbial megaphone at my fingertips. And while I can sit there and yell through that megaphone all day, part of my job as an advocate is to actually give that megaphone to other people and let them yell through it as well. So I like to think of, raising the voices of those who don't have a voice yet, whose voice gets drowned out, and whose voice I agree with, and who I think are saying good things. And I think that's another thing that you can do as an educator, and as someone who is, again, trying to be a good role model for others, is share the power of your voice with those who also need it as well. So what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to get on my soapbox a little bit, and I'm going to advocate for an area that I put a lot of time and energy into, and that's around the idea of gender inequity in medicine and academia. And I want to share with you all a study that actually just came out in Harvard Business Review just a couple of months ago that I think is related to our topic today a little bit. And I'll share some of this with you to see how you digest this as well. And so I'm going to walk you through, don't worry about reading each one of these boxes. I'm going to walk through each one of them here individually. So this was a study performed in 2022. This is a survey of a little over 1,100 participants at Fortune 500 companies across multiple different industries. And they examined the perceived prevalence and effectiveness of public allyship from the vantage point of both men and women. So let's jump through these real quickly. The first question here, basically, I've got the question sort of boiled down here at the bottom. Are men acting as allies for gender equity? If you ask both men and women across leadership levels, men, about half to 3/4 of all men say, yeah, we do a good job of advocating for gender equity. And our female colleagues, about a quarter to less than half say, no, guys, you're not doing a great job here. I tend to believe the women on that one as well. The next question is, do you believe biased behaviors happen to women? Are women interrupted or spoken over? Do they have their judgments questions? Are they not given credit when credit is due? And men say, yeah, that happens a little bit. As low as 10% of men said that happened, and as many as 30%, which is, abysmally small. And you can see that almost 30% to 50% of women said that, yeah, this happens a decent amount of time. So men sort of have their blinders on when it comes to recognizing that women experience biases in their workforce. And then finally, how often do you see men acting as allies? And I thought this was a really interesting one as well, because men here, again, 50% to 75% say, yeah, we do a good job. And our female colleagues come in and say, no, guys, you're not doing that great. And so simply put, men aren't really showing up as much as they need to. And so that was my soapbox. That was my moment of sharing. This is something that I'm interested in and something that I advocate for on social media platforms. Find what's interesting to you, and don't be afraid to voice your opinion there as well. So let's move on to our third domain, talking about citizenship when networking. And this is kind of the more fun area to think about as well. I think this is why a lot of people sort of enter into social media. And here are three sort of things that I've learned over the years. The first one is know your voice and what it is you're trying to accomplish. And how do you go about doing this? You can use a voice document. So this voice document was provided by a friend and colleague of mine, Gopi Astic, who is a hospitalist at Northwestern. And Gopi put this together, said it took her less than an hour. And it talks about what is her voice, what's her elevator pitch, right? So when she describes who she is, she can do it in a single sentence. She then sort of looks at it from a third person point of view and describes her voice on social media, describes the tone of her voice. And then she goes into tips of what she doesn't want to do, and then the specific goals of her communication when she's using social media. And what Gopi does is she revisits this every 3 or 4 months just to reorient herself, right? To keep herself on track as she's engaging on social media platforms. And this keeps a consistent message for her and for the people who are following her. People know what Gopi is about. They know what she's going to tweet about, and people will engage her on those things. I think it's also okay to be human. One of the first things I learned when I got into social media, or one of the first things I did, was I kind of said, no, Charlie, I'm never gonna venture outside of work. It's always going to be, I'm going to tweet about the latest article in GME Internal Medicine. I'm only going to talk about work. I'm never going to venture outside of that avenue. But over time, I got a little bit bored tweeting about those things. But B, I also started realizing that, part of the reason people interacted with me was to sort of feel out who I was. It's called social media, right? And how we interact with one another is quite important. And for me, I'm a father first, a husband second, and a doctor third. And the thing that I convey whenever I'm on social media is that it's okay that there is a blending of being a physician and something else. And I think that's, again, good role modeling for people on social media to show that work isn't everything. It's hard. I fail frequently. And I'm going to share that with people. And I'm going to share with you the struggles I have being a father and a physician at the same time. Now, this is a personal choice that I've made. I know not everybody wants to or does do that, but I've found that it's actually increased the social interactions I've had and made them more meaningful. When I run into colleagues now at annual conferences, hey, how's your son doing? I remember when he was doing that and that sort of thing. And it just makes me feel connected to a larger community a little bit more as well. Be vulnerable, make and share those mistakes. I think that's important under that context as well. And the final thing is find your community. A lot of times people jump into social media and they just start swimming in that deep, deep ocean all by themselves. And trust me, it's a deep ocean out there. And I think the thing that has made social media great for me is I found a community, I connected with those people, and it's made the time I've spent there more valuable for me and for others. And I think, evolution has taught us that, we are stronger, safer, and more productive when we exist in communities. And why is that? Because people tend to be more civil, and we know what we say or what we do can and most likely will come back to either help us or haunt us. So if we find our community, I think we become better citizens, better digital citizens out there. Twitter is sort of the all-encompassing digital community that kind of exists out there. At the Journal of Hospital Medicine, we have created the JHM chat, which is a monthly conversation for hospitalists engaging around topics that are important for our field. And I've met and made many good friends through this community over the years. So why is this conversation important? Why are we talking about digital citizenship writ large, right? And why is it important to you? There's a great saying, you're the average of 5 people you spend the most time with. Studies show that people spend on average 147 minutes, so about 2.5 hours a day on social media platforms. Thus, you are likely defined by who you follow and interact with on social media. So simply put, if you're a good citizen, then others will be as well. And one of the things as I reflect about my time on social media platforms, I've come to the conclusion that, I'm a better doctor, I'm a better researcher, I'm a better father, I'm a better person because of the interactions I've had on social media. Mainly because I follow people who I think are good citizens, who are just good individuals who practice many of the characteristics that I outlined a little bit earlier as well. And I hope that, what I've learned from other people, I'm doing as well and sharing with others to hopefully make that avenue a little better place. So what are my take-home points so far? So I realized that this talk was meant for educators, and I know how much you all love your objectives and your goals and your aims. So I didn't start with those, but I'm going to end with them here. And these are the 3 things that I would potentially walk away with. So the first is professionalism is an antiquated term that may not necessarily work well anymore and may not be as helpful as we think it is. And so think very hard when you think about the idea of asking someone to be professional. I think citizenship is a better term. I think it's more accurate to sort of the goal that we're trying to achieve. I've outlined 6 characteristics here about what I think makes a good digital citizen, and trying to exemplify those as well. And I hope I've shown that we can be good digital citizens as we teach. So just as we teach in clinical environments, we can teach and educate in digital environments. And the same role modeling we do there, we can do it in social media spheres as well. That it's okay to advocate for things. Don Berwick gives you permission. Charlie Ray gives you permission to advocate on social media. And that we can use social media to network and be a good digital citizen there as well, within each one of those domains. I always like to, end my discussions with social media with this great Edward R. Murrow quote. So just because your voice reaches halfway around the world doesn't mean you are wiser than when it reached only to the end of the bar. So remain humble as your megaphone grows and as you interact on social media. Because when you turn the computer off, you're still the same person you were right before you turned it on, right? And I end here saying, of course, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak with you all today. I recognize that I am not the world's foremost expert on this. Again, I would argue that certainly dancing in some gray zones here. And I always welcome feedback on this discussion on this topic. And I would love to hear how do other people think about digital citizenship? And what are some qualities of a good digital citizen that I missed along the way? And so I'm very open to that. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can email me here. I am obviously on Twitter, and you can find me there. And who knows where we'll all be in a couple of months as social media continues to sort of sit in a time of uncertainty. So I appreciate this time and the opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. That was a really great presentation, and I personally learned a lot from that. I'm sure everybody who views this video as well will.
Great. Thanks, Daphne. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.